Hi guys, it's me. It's Miss Checka. I've got my tea. I've got my cookies. Have this book. I'm excited to read this story with you today. Oh, I see some more people joining us. That's awesome. Ginger snaps. So delicious. So, it's Tess. Hi, Tess. I love it when y'all say hi so I can see who is here. Okay. So, when we left off yesterday, we finished the tea party. Y'all, before we start, I just had a Zoom meeting. I'm so tired. Zooming, it's tiring. Okay. So when we left off, we finished the Mad Hatter's tea party, and we were going to start this chapter on the Queen's croquet ground. And here we have the spades. And you remember from yesterday that in a deck of cards, you've got the hearts, which is the royal family. You've got the diamonds for the courtiers. The clubs are the guards because it's a little joke. A club is a weapon you can hit somebody with. And a spade, the spades are the gardeners because this is a garden spade. And after I did this video yesterday, I was like, oh, my spade, it's a sign from the universe. I should go garden. So I did. Okay, so let's start chapter 8. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, and she went nearer to watch them. And just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, 5. Don't go splashing paint over me like that." "I couldn't help it," said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow. On which 7 looked up and said, "Oh, that's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say only yesterday that you deserve to be beheaded." "What for?" said the one who had spoken first. "That's none of your business, 2, said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5. "And I'll tell him it was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." I'm looking over here. I should have brought in a tulip root. So in your house, okay, well, I'll just tell you. In my house, I have no onions because I don't like onions. Oh, hello. Okay, I've got some different people there. I don't have any onions. I don't like onions. Onions are canceled at Miss Checka's house. But I do have a lot of tulip bulbs because I love tulips. I like red tulips in the springtime. But they look really similar because they're bulbs that you plant under the ground. So, yeah, don't eat them though. Tulip will give you a nice plant, but don't eat it. Anyway, 7 flung down his brush and had just begun with, "Well, of all the unjust things," when his eye chanced to fall upon Alice as she stood watching them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked round also, and all of them bowed low. "Would you tell me, please," said Alice a little timidly, "why are you painting those roses?" 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, that this here ought to have been a red rose, and we put in a white one by mistake. And if the Queen was to find out, we should have all our heads cut off, So you see, miss, we're doing our best before she comes to," at this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" This is how, when I go into a room, I expect people to react also. This check is coming. "The Queen!" The 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, eager to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs, Get it? Get it? They were all shaped like the three gardeners, oblong and flat with their hands and feet at the corner. Next came the 10 courtiers. They were ornamented all over with diamonds and walked 2 and 2 as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along, hand in hand in couples. They were all ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the white rabbit. It was talking in a hurried, nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went by without noticing her. Then came the knave of hearts, carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. And last of all, this grand procession came the king and queen of hearts. So let's get a picture. Yep. She's a little shouty. Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought not to lie down on her face like the three gardeners. She could not remember ever having heard of such a rule at processions. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she, if people had all to lie down on their faces so that they couldn't see it? So she stood where she was and waited. So guys, a procession. So you know the word proceed, like if you're going to proceed with something, you're going to do it. Well, a procession is a parade of fancy people. So if I'm the queen and I'm the queen of Fort Worth, Texas, and I go on a procession, that means I put on my fancy clothes, and then I get a posse. Oh my gosh, Miss Cheka, she's so awesome. She's the queen. That's what a procession is. Now, back when England had kings and queens that were a little bit more powerful, they used to go on processions. And thank you. They used to go on processions all over the country. But the thing is, if you were chosen that the king or the queen or both were going to stay at your house, that means that you had to say yes. You had to be really grateful for the honor, and you had to pay for all of their huge posse of courtiers and people and servants to go. So if you're the king or the queen, you go on procession. Everybody cheers for you. Everybody gives you a free place to stay and free food and everything. And on top of it, they're grateful for it. So, which, I don't know, if Beyonce told me that she was coming to my house, I would kind of do the same thing because it is an honor. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. And the queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said it to the knave of hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the queen, tossing her head impatiently and turning to Alice. She went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please your majesty," said Alice very politely. But she added to herself, "But they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, pointing to the three gardeners who were lying round the rose tree. For you see, as they were lying on their faces, the pattern on their backs was the same as the rest of the pack. So she could not see whether they were gardeners or soldiers or courtiers or three of her children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." That is not how you talk to a queen. If a queen asks you a question, you do not say that. The queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, began screaming, "Off with her head! Off with—" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon her arm timidly and said, "Consider, my dear, she's only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so very carefully with one foot. "Get up," said the queen in a shrill, loud voice. And the 3 gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the king, to the queen, to the royal children. And may it please your majesty, said 2 in a very humble tone, going down on one knee as he spoke. We were trying. I see, said the queen, who had meanwhile been examining the roses. Off with their heads! And the procession moved on, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners who ran to Alice for protection. You shan't be beheaded, said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered about for a minute or 2 looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. Are their heads off? Shouted the queen. Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty, the soldiers shouted in reply. That's right, shouted the queen. Can you play croquet? The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice as the question was evidently meant for her. Yes, shouted Alice. Come on then, roared the queen. And Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. So everybody's kind of shouting at each other. It's a very fine day, said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. Very, said Alice. Where's the Duchess? Hush, hush, said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then raised himself upon tiptoe, put his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, She's under sentence of execution. What for? Said Alice. Did you say, what a pity? The rabbit asked. No, I didn't, said Alice. I don't think it's at all a pity. I said, what for? Because Alice doesn't think it's any problem that the Duchess is getting executed, because remember, the Duchess is the one who gave away her pig baby? She boxed at the queen's ears, the rabbit began. Alice gave a little scream of laughter. Oh, hush, the rabbit whispered in a frightened tone. The queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late, and the queen said, Go to your places, shouted the queen in a voice of thunder, and people began running about in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they all settled down in a minute or 2, and the game began. That's how you know it's serious business, is when somebody says something in a voice of thunder. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet game in all her life. It was all ridges and furrows. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make arches. I'm going to pause for a little second. 1, to show you a picture, and then 2, to tell you a Miss Checka story. So number 1, croquet, it looks a little bit like golf. Like you have a mallet, it's a stick, and then you hit the ball, except instead of trying to go into a hole, you have hoops, right? But the instead of like a little tiny golf ball, a croquet ball is like this big, and it's wood, and the mallet is wood. And then the hoops are usually like little metal hoops. So here you have this illustration. So here's Alice, but instead of having a croquet ball, she's got a little hedgehog, and it is all wound up in a ball. And instead of having a wooden mallet, she's got this flamingo, but the flamingo does not want to be used as a mallet. And then the illustration doesn't show it, but the playing cards kind of put themselves into hoops like that. So here is my story. Once upon a time, I was reading this very book with a 7th grade class, and one of the kids was like, what's croquet? What's croquet? So I thought, these dear innocent children need to play croquet so that they can understand this part of the book. So a kid lent me their croquet set, and I took everybody outside, and I was in a real bad mood. It was like the afternoon of some day we'd had testing or something. was in a real bad mood. 7th graders like acting up, getting on my nerves. It happens. Also, I'm not a very sporty person. So we go outside, and here's my class, and we put the hoops, and we've got the croquet mallets, and we've got the croquet balls, and I'm trying to explain to the 7th graders how to play the game. And do you think they were paying attention? No, they were not paying attention to my directions. So I'm talking, I'm getting stung by mosquitoes, so I keep like slapping my legs, and then the kids are trying to interrupt me to tell me something instead of listening when I need them to listen to the directions. And so I'm like, oh, this is so frustrating because I'm trying to tell you directions. And like the mosquito keeps getting my leg. And like, why are you guys keep interrupting me? And like that. So then, you know what happened? One of the kids finally said, I'm the only one getting eaten by mosquitoes. And you know what it was? I was standing in a fire anthill that was this big around. This huge fire anthill. And then I was standing in it, experiencing actual ants in the pants situation. And then all of a sudden, I could just feel it, right? Like, just getting stung everywhere by fire ants. I started screaming, ah! So that's what the kids, that's why they were trying to interrupt me, is because they were trying to warn me and I wasn't listening to them. So guess who wasn't doing a good job listening? It was me. And then one of the kids yells out, hit it with the mallet, hit it with the mallet. So I take the croquet mallet and I just pow, 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 which don't do that. That is the wrong choice to make if you are in a fire anthill, because it will only make those fire ants even more mad at you. So that was just like a real bad situation. And then I thought, well, this is real embarrassing, but maybe those children will forget about it. Nope, those children never forgot about it. Anyway, that is my story about croquet. You should play it. It's a fun game, but you should always be very sure that there are no fire ants where you're standing. Okay, back to the story. Okay. The chief difficulty Alice found at first was in managing her flamingos. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away comfortably under her arm, with its legs hanging down, but generally, just as she had got its neck nicely straightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a blow with its head, it would twist itself around and look up in her face with such a puzzled expression that she could not help burst out laughing. And when she had got its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled itself and was in the act of crawling away. Besides all this, there was generally a ridge or a furrow in the way wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog to. And as the doubled up soldiers were always getting up and walking off to different other parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. All the players all played at once, without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while and fighting for the hedgehogs. And in a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion and went stamping about and shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," about once in a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy, to be sure, but she had not as yet had any dispute with the queen. A dispute is another great word, but it means fight, right? Like a disagreement. But she thought that it might happen at any minute. And then she thought, what would become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive. She was looking out for some way of escape and wondering whether she could get away without being seen when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have someone to talk to." So we are going to end right there in this part of the chapter, and we can, on Monday, Is today Friday? It's so hard to keep track of the days now. On Monday at 1, we will continue. I think we will probably finish this book by maybe, well, definitely next week, but maybe before Friday. So before we go, does anybody have any questions about Croquet or Alice or Lewis Carroll or hedgehogs or dormice? Mm-hmm. I know there's always a lag, but also maybe nobody has any questions. Okay, if nobody has any questions, then remember the life advice that we have learned so far, which is, am I any good at croquet? No, I am not. I am not good at any sports. Remember to not eat strange mushrooms. And if you're going to play croquet, then don't stand in fire ants. And also, flamingos don't really like to be used as mallets. We should respect all animals. Okay, Tess. Tess wants some Spanish. All right. Okay, Tess. So let's do, how about this? Let's do, so here we have the king and the queen, which we can tell because the king is wearing his crown, and the queen, which is very angry because she has a red face, and she's got here a heart because she's the queen of hearts. So let's say this is el rey y la reina. Entonces es el rey, es la reina. So the king is el rey and the queen is la reina. And then look at what they're holding. Okay, so this word you hear in the news for something completely different, but the name for a crown is la corona, la corona. And in English, we're kind of pronouncing it corona, but what corona means is a crown. So funny enough, you also have this word in your science class a lot because you might have the corona of the sun, which looks like a crown around it. In this case, we hear a lot in the news that there's a virus, there's a sickness, and part of it looks a little bit like a crown. So they call it a corona virus, but it's corona. So it's el rey tiene la corona y la reina tiene el corazón. So corazón, corona, rey y reina. Ahí están. Okay, all right, there's your Spanish. And I'll see you guys on Monday. Everybody be good. Bye, y'all.